Hey guys, so I'm going to do a really quick start to rendering in Houdini because I remember when I first started using Houdini, I was coming from Maya and I had no idea where any of the rendering stuff was or how to even get a render out. So I also have not rehearsed this at all, so I might be bumbling through a little bit. But here I've got a simple little particle sim where the colors are driven by the velocity parameter, and that's all I've done. I haven't put on any extra like shaders or anything like that. I've just messed with geometry in Houdini. So first, when you want to render, like if you want to view what you've been working on with a renderer, there's this render view tab right up here that you'll click. Now I'm going to click it and you'll see uh, sort of a render. I've already been playing with it, but normally if you haven't clicked on this yet and you click on it, you won't see anything here. But I've already been practicing, so there is a little bit of render here. And so bare bones, if you just click this render button, it'll start rendering what you see in the scene based on your location in the viewport. So it's just showing me exactly what I'm seeing in the viewport, no cameras. If you want more fine-tuned control, we're going to go to our out network. So normally you work in the object network where it's all your geometry is, but Houdini has a number of different other networks, and out is sort of your render, your output, your exports. And so when we clicked this render button, it automatically plopped down this mantra node. If you want a custom mantra node, you just hit tab, mantra, and you drop down your own mantra node. And you can adjust all your settings. And I won't go through settings here. And you can look up the different settings. I'm just showing you how to get up and running. And what you can do is in your viewport, now that we have a new mantra node, you can select that new mantra node. You can continue using IPR or you can go to mantra. And so it's currently set on scene view 1, and this is our scene view area. And so it's only showing us what we have here. So if we want a camera, if we want to view it through a camera, we can drop down a camera node. And the easiest way I move a camera around is I click on this view tab here, click on camera, we just drop down. And if you want to move the camera around, you have to click this lock button. So this button, the camera is locked, so we can move our camera however we want it. But make sure once you have your camera positioned the way you want it, you unclick this lock button, and when you start scrolling it around, it'll automatically put you back into perspective. So that's how I set my camera. You can set it through the translations and rotations thing here, but I don't do much camera work personally. So that's just the easiest way I set up my camera. You can also attach it to a curve and have it follow along the curve, but this is just how I normally do it. So we have this camera set up. If we go back to our render view, and I have clicked my new mantra node, and here I see our camera is now in this drop down menu. So if I hit camera and click render, it'll start rendering from our camera perspective. So now let me show you, let's see, let's go back here. Let me adjust the timeline a little bit. So you see I'm adjusting the timeline and this renderer is updating automatically. So that can be good and it can be bad. It's good if you want to quickly scrub through like this and kind of see what's happening. But if you forget that you've left this renderer on and you are messing with your simulation and it's taking even longer than usual, it's because it'll keep trying to render in the background even though you're not using it. So even though you click off the tab, it's still going to try and render when you're not even looking at it. So what you do is you just click this big red stop button so you can keep working without your rendering chugging along in the background and eating up resources. So that's a very quick way of how to render. Sorry if you hear my dog. He is protecting the house right now. Sorry about that weird cut. I had to go calm my dog down because I just couldn't think. And now I'm going to have to actually edit this video, but here we go. So what I just showed you was a very quick rundown of how to check your renders while you're working. So I'm going to talk really quick about shaders, how to get started with those pretty quickly. If you click on this Material Palette tab, you'll see a bunch of presets that Houdini has already made for different shaders and shader networks, and I'm not much of a shader myself, so I just kind of like use these as sort of a crutch. But their principled shader is sort of like their catch-all shader. So if we just drag and drop that into our material palette real quick, we see it's right there. And if we go into our, regular geometry, I can just drag and drop it and it applies it to our object. So we see it's kind of done some work here. If we up the metallic property of it, it'll change in the viewport and now it looks all glittery and shiny. And so you can just click these presets here, drag them on if you want. You can build up your own shader network if you want. I've never done that before. Really quick, I want to talk about one of my favorite shaders, and it's a very just basic shader I apply to a lot of my more artistic renderings. If I just want it very graphic, is their constant shader. So what I've done, here let me back up a little bit. What I've done here is I've gone back to my object network, clicked here, and gone to my shop network or my shader operator network. And I'm going to just drop down a constant shader. And all a constant shader is just pure just color. There's no shading or anything really. So I just plop down this constant shader, and I can't really drag, or can I? Can I drag and drop? Oh, I can drag and drop on it. Anyway, so here's a constant shader. It's just one constant color. I find it artistic and cool looking, sort of toony, so I use a constant shader a lot. You just drag and drop it on there. So that's a really quick look at shaders. So let's look at rendering if we want to actually render a sequence of frames. So I'm going to work with the mantra node I put down. And to look at a few basic things, you can render the current frame, which is one frame, or if you want to render a frame range, you click down there and it'll render frame range. And it'll automatically populate these boxes here. And if these boxes are anything, if the fill is anything other than black, so right now they're this like teal, that means there's some sort of expression or mathematical thing in here. So right now it takes my start and my end positions of my timeline and it'll populate those boxes. And it took me forever to learn that to change these, you have to right click and click delete channels. So what if I only want the first 25 frames? Well, if I want to change that, I have to delete the channel first and then manually adjust it. So you can render to disk in the background, which will save the images to your computer. I don't normally do it this way because I'm not a huge renderer. I just sort of render what's in the viewport and save it out. If you're wanting to do different passes, if you're wanting to do a lot of compositing, you'll want to save those images. Since I'm more cheap on that end, I just render straight to in play, and I'll show you what that looks like. You click render to in play, it thinks, and it'll pop up and start rendering right in front of you. And so it'll render all the 20 images, and you can play on it as it's rendering so you can sort of see what's happening. Whereas if you render to disk in the background, you can't really see that, or render to disk. The difference between render to disk and render to disk in background is if you run it in the background, you're still able to use Houdini as it's rendering. See, right now, I can't use anything. Like Houdini's completely stuck because it's currently just rendering. If you render in the background, which is only available if you want to render to disk, oops, it decided to start clicking, or update what I clicked on. Anyway, you can still use Houdini while it's saving those images in the background. So it's rendered my 20 frames, and this is what they look like. And there's a bunch of different export options if you just want to export this. QuickTime movie, I'm not sure why it's showing me all these different ones. There's usually only like 3 options, but for some reason there's 20 now. If you're using a student version or apprentice version of Houdini, you're going to have limited ways that you can export, and you're going to have very limited resolution. I think 720 is the limit of resolution for apprentice version. If you're using Houdini on school computers and if you're using the render farm, you don't have those limitations. So that's another perk of using the render farm. But for now, it should be okay for what y'all are doing for now. And so you can go in and export those. I won't. One quick thing is when you click export, nothing happens. You have to actually move the thing out of the way to see all your settings and stuff. And that's really weird and took me a while to figure out. I thought it was broken, but it's just like, no, you have to move this pane over. So you can export it out and save it and use it however you want. So I hope this is helpful, and you can always ask me questions if you run into trouble. Good luck!